So I know that some of you are familiar with our summer short-term fellowship, with the summer short-term fellowship program. But briefly, for those of you who are not, annually, the BMRC offers a 1-month residential fellowship right here in the city of Chicago for the summer short-term fellows. The fellowship program has engaged scholars, artists, writers, and public historians. And the idea in having them here is so that they can conduct research at one of, well, not just one, but at a few of our BMRC member institutions and formulate new historical narratives on the Black experience. So then the original research and art developed through this program is significant, and as it does illuminate national and international importance of Chicago to African American history. So a huge thank you, really briefly, to our 2022 Fellowship Jury Committee, Richard Courage of SUNY Westchester County Community College, Jonathan Fenderson, professor over at Washington University in St. Louis, Lionel Kimball, professor over of history, Chicago State University, Annie Mooney, who's professor of art history and visual culture at Columbia College, Chicago, Lisa Olson, who is director of Chicago Studies at the Newberry and also sits on the BMRC board, Doug Williams, national recruiter and of AmeriCorps' Vista and Citizen Schools. So thank you to all of them. This summer, we do have 7 fellows, all of whom are listed on our website if you want to find out more about them and their research. Also, please continue to stay tuned into the BMRC social media and checking our website for presentation dates. I know that many of you are already looking forward to that. So today, we are fortunate to hear from one of the fellows about her research. Michelle Johnson is a joint PhD candidate in African American Studies and History at Yale University. She grew up in Waukegan, Illinois, which is a far north suburb of Chicago. Her research takes her back to Chicago in part to reconnect with her family history. Her father grew up in Lake Meadows, and her grandparents were Southside residents for most of their lives. Michelle is committed to producing research that reaches beyond traditional and academic settings and hopes that her research on the civil rights movement in Chicago might one day inspire young Chicagoans to create change within their communities. She was originally inspired to study history in high school and asked the simple question at that time, what happened during the civil rights movement in Waukegan? She hopes her research inspires young scholars to ask similar questions. Michelle, if you are ready to share your screen.
I am. Give me just a minute to figure out my technology.
Okay, not a problem. Take a minute, and we're looking forward to hearing from you. Afterwards, we will have time for a few questions from Michelle.
There we go. That'll work, right?
Yes.
Okay, well, I wanted to start off by saying hello to everyone. It's great to see you all. This is a really awesome community that I'm so glad I get a chance to be a part of this summer and hopefully, continue being a part of moving forward. It was really exciting to hear from the summer interns. I'm really excited to hear all of you doing oral history research, which I think is so important. And unfortunately not something I got to this summer, but plan to do in the future. I'm also just excited to have this opportunity to have this fellowship this summer. Like Allison said in my introduction, I've been working on this project in some form or fashion since I was in high school. It actually started as a Chicago History Day or National History Day project when I was a sophomore. So we're looking at more than 10 years on this project now. And being a fellow this summer actually led me into archives that I didn't even know existed. So even after 10 years of this project, finding new archives and things that I didn't know, collections I needed to be looking at but had no idea even existed, was really exciting. So I'm just really grateful to have this opportunity and be in such a good cohort. I also wanted to give a big shout out to the rest of my summer fellows here on this call. I know I see you all, and I'm really excited to hear about your research in talks moving forward too, because I know that we're all sort of together as a community doing really amazing work. just to get a little bit more into my background, I know Allison did some of this introduction for me, but I did grow up in Waukegan, so not a true Chicagoan by any means, but sort of a Chicago Aryan as my background. And really, I started this research because I was interested in my own family history. Unfortunately, my grandparents on my dad's side passed away when I was very young, kindergarten or so. So definitely before I could have done any sort of oral history research, unfortunately, or oral history interviews with them. And my research is really meant to, in part, sort of fill those gaps, right? I want to know what's happening in the 50s and 60s as they were living on the south side of Chicago. What was that like for them? What were the political issues that were happening around them? That sort of was what sparked this. And then, even though I don't think that they were particularly active in the civil rights movement, it is really interesting for me to hear about what other people were doing, what other people's grandparents were doing, right? So as I collect this sort of research, I'm always sort of thinking in the back of my mind that hopefully one day maybe someone's great-grandchild reads this book and can pinpoint their grandmother as doing really awesome work in the 1950s or 1960s. So that's really what this is all rooted in, is sort of this idea of family history, this idea of what is still unknown out there and how I can help sort of make that bridge as I move forward as a scholar and hopefully as a public historian in some way, shape, or form as well. So now that I've sort of introduced myself, let me also introduce my project. So my project is called Wagons and Warehouses. You can see it on the screen. Civil rights organizing in Chicago, 1942 to 1966. That time period is 24 years, but really expands a little bit longer than that. And that project title is to my dissertation title for now. So this project is my dissertation project. We'll see how it continues to grow. I'm sort of early. I have not started writing yet or anything like that. So I'm definitely early in the process, and really excited to hear all of your feedback as I am early in this process. But that is sort of the working title of my project for now. It covers a lot of ground, right? 24 years is a lot of time to cover for a dissertation. It doesn't sound like so long, but then once you get into the archives, you learn that actually that's quite a long time. It's meant to be sort of bracketed by, at the beginning, sort of influx of Black folks to Chicago in the Great Migration era. Really, again, pushing back kind of into the 1930s, but really starting in the 1940s and then ending in 1966, because that is when Martin Luther King enters the scene in Chicago for a year on his End Slums campaign. It ends there, not because that's a really clean point. I'm not necessarily satisfied with 1966 as the end point, but mostly because as a dissertation, I got to end somewhere. And I can't write 12 books as my dissertation, right? So I think that we can look at 1966 as a possible endpoint. We could look at 2022 as a possible endpoint, right? This fight for equal education and better education for Black communities is very much still present today. And so 1966 is a little bit of the unsatisfactory endpoint, and we'll actually see where that ends up going as I continue to write. But as I sort of get into the landmarks of what I'm talking about, what are the key moments of this history, you'll see on the screen that there's an image of a protest that says, "Put Willis out without a doubt." A young woman holding up a poster. Willis was Benjamin Willis, who's the superintendent of Chicago Public Schools in the 1950s and 1960s. Really controversial guy on the one hand, very well regarded for building a ton of new schools across the city. As we saw an influx of folks coming into the city during this era, he was building schools left and right. Also controversial for being kind of racist. Also controversial for really sort of putting up poor school facilities in Black neighborhoods. So that's where Wagons and Warehouses comes from. The Black community during this time period deems these poor facilities Willis Wagons and Willis Warehouses. I'll get a little bit more into that as we go through this presentation. But as a historian, I would be remiss if I didn't talk a little bit about the historiography. So here are 3 books that really sparked my interest in this project. As I was getting into it, I wrote my undergraduate thesis on sort of civil rights movements in Chicago, not necessarily specific to this particular school issue, but rather more broadly what was happening, more focused on Martin Luther King in Chicago, what was the End Slums campaign about, all of that. And 2 things came up out of that research in my undergraduate work. One was that there was not a single woman mentioned in my research, and part of that is due to the limitations of undergraduate research. And some of that is due to the fact that they were not in the archives easily accessible for me. So that's something that I'm still working on. And then the other thing that came up is there just wasn't a ton of local leadership that came out of this thing. I think there's a couple key characters, and again, I'll mention them later as we get into it, but mainly I was focused on Martin Luther King. We were talking about these big leaders, and I wanted to get more into the local leadership. Now, as I move forward in my research, as I've gotten more interested in the school desegregation movement in and of itself, I have some more books to lean on, luckily, and some good research. You'll see, I know some of these people are affiliated with the BMRC in various ways. We have a documentary up here, 63 Boycott, which is really the heart of my research, is around that movement, right? So the 63 Boycott was a huge school boycott in October 1963, and the movement that surrounded that. It's an amazing documentary. I would absolutely recommend it to anyone. While my work is a lot of kind of boring images of paper, right? Like I'm about to show you a bunch of old paper that is not the most exciting thing to look at. This documentary is full of amazing, amazing imagery, amazing video, interviews with people, all of that. So would absolutely recommend any of these books, but a lot of these books are focused after the 1960s. And so I'm really interested in what came before that era. So this summer, I spent a lot of time in the archives. I'm actually still very much working in the archives. I'm still in Chicago and I'm still doing this research. I'm not done yet. And I've been here since June, so I'm still going. But I was bouncing around archives all over the place. So I've been in UIC, I've been at the Harold Washington Library. I visited the Woodson Library actually a few months ago before summer, but I have some work in their collections too. The Chicago History Museum really came through for me this summer with some archives that I A, didn't know existed, and B, were really golden for me, including the Cyrus Hall Adams papers. Cyrus Adams sounding like he's a guy from the 1800s or something, but turns out he was a school board member in the 1960s. And then University of Chicago, where I really dove into some collections that I already knew existed. So some of these papers, absolutely, I had visited in the past in some ways or fashion. And this summer, I really had the opportunity to dive into these collections full in. And that has been amazing. So I'm going to show off a few documents that I collected. I will say that I have taken pictures of over 1,200 documents this summer. And I certainly have not read anywhere near 1,200. So my sort of tactics going into the summer was I'm going to take as many pictures as I possibly can, and then I'm going to bring them all back with me to New Haven and really dive in, read them, get at it. Obviously, I read a little bit as I go through to find out what I even need to be taking pictures of, but a lot of the work still is to be done. So a lot of that reading is still to be done. But I did highlight a few documents that either changed the way I was thinking about my project as I went through, or that I think are just really interesting documents, hopefully to show off. Again, I know that looking at pieces of paper on a screen are not always the most exciting thing, but hopefully it's at least sort of fun for us as we go through. So the first document, and I will try to make this actually a little bit bigger. So hopefully that's a little bit bigger, a little bit easier for everyone to read. And so we have the Chicago Schools, official organ of the Citizen Schools Committee. The Citizen Schools Committee being, as it sounds like, a citizens committee working on school. It was a mixed group, originally sort of meant to curb sort of misuse of funding in the schools, actually, early on in the 20th century, and sort of shifted into more of the school desegregation movement as we go through. But this document is really important to me because I actually came across it just a few weeks ago, and it's from October 1939. So this headline about double shift schools, which means that students are going only for half the day, was something that was a major issue in the 1960s, right? The 1963 boycott is actually partially about this double shift issue. But to see that headline coming from a newsletter in 1939 blew my mind. I had no idea that that was on people's radars, really, at least at this level in that decade. So that was really exciting. That's why I'm showing it to you first. Not necessarily, again, because it's the most interesting document in the world, but because it really starts to push that timeline a little bit earlier than I even knew about. The issues are a little bit different. I think that the way that they're posing things is like, oh, the South Side of Chicago is so bad. These students need to be in school all day. And I don't necessarily agree with that or think that that's the way that people pose it as we go forward through the 20th century, but it is something that was happening in the 30s, and I just didn't know that prior to finding this document. Moving us forward, I did know that in the 1940s, one of the big issues was how schools were teaching Black history, right? Something that's still very much an issue. And so here we have a document sort of talking about the school books that are being used, talking about who's writing those textbooks, what are they talking about, how are they posing like the work of the Klan, for example. And so this is one of the key issues that people are latching onto, and the NAACP in particularly is latching onto in the 1940s. So this is, again, that earlier work, definitely before Brown versus Board of Education, where we see sort of the ball starting rolling on trying to get better education for Black students. And this is, I mean, now we know that Black history for sure is going to help white students as well. Like, this history is just important for all of us to know, but it definitely is also something that is being pushed by Black civil rights organizations. Moving forward again, we have a statement of the NAACP before the Chicago Board of Education in 1962. I would say that a lot of the documents that I came across were testimonies at Board of Education meetings. These are like the really golden nuggets that I have of PTAs and individual parents and civil rights organizations coming forward and giving their testimony about the state of the schools. So this is just one example of that. I have possibly hundreds of these in my now collection that I have, and a lot to read through, but I found them to be really intriguing, really sometimes entertaining, and really sort of thoughtful ways that people were presenting the issues of the schools to the Board of Education, really starting in the late 50s, early 60s. Then we get into 1963, and here we have that march, right? This is what that documentary is about. This is the boycott. In October of 1963. So this is a poster. Again, hopefully this is a more interesting image to look at, but I think that it shows that, like, this was a major march. This is not necessarily the image that people expect to see of Chicago with the L running above it, right? This is something that maybe you expect to see in Selma, Alabama, or something like that. So I think that that is one thing that really comes out of this research, is that these issues were not just Southern issues. Again, a flyer asking parents to get their students involved in this boycott, and actually highlighting the fact that while they were having this boycott, they were also having freedom days and freedom schools for the students. And as part of that, we have a guide to freedom school leaders. So this was actually a very fun find, sort of the syllabus, if you will, for freedom schools, including some freedom songs. You got a freedom diploma at the end if you were a student who attended this event. And it was just like a very fun find for me, something that I think is, again, sort of something that gets talked about with Mississippi freedom schools. No one's thinking about, oh, if there's thousands, over 100,000 students staying out of school for a day even, what are they doing on that day? And one of those answers was going to their local churches and going to freedom schools, singing freedom songs, getting a freedom diploma, talking about freedom, all of that. Couple more documents. Here we have 1965. This is Al Raby. He's one of the key figures of the Chicago movement. Ends up partnering with Martin Luther King when he shows up in town, but for now is leading this schools movement, and gave a talk at Soldier Field. This is an image from the talk at Soldier Field, and this is the speech from a different talk. But I think this speech in particular makes a really strong connection between the importance of the Chicago movement as a sort of lead into a national movement for the, I think that they describe it as a northern ghetto, but really the issues of the northern urban Black person during this time period. Finally, here we have an organization called the Women Mobilize for Change, which was a huge find for me because I am really interested in women in the movement. And this is a later issue too of them supporting Black students. So I think here you see that shift from parents and teachers and adults pushing for better education. And by the late 1960s, you see students who perhaps they were part of that boycott 5 years earlier doing their own boycott, starting to lead their own movement. So I found that to be really interesting. Finally, let me wrap up with what's next for me, finishing the summer research. I do want to eventually conduct oral histories. I did not get to it this summer, but it is something that's on my radar, perhaps not for my dissertation, but certainly if this thing ever turns into a book. I will be taking a trip out to Stanford in the fall to see the Benjamin Willis papers. I don't know why they ended up at Stanford, but there they are. I have 1,200 plus documents to read, and then I have to write this dissertation. So thank you for coming. I would love to hear any questions, feedback, all of the above. And if you have lots of feedback for me, feel free to email me as well, because I would absolutely love to hear any and all feedback you have.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Michelle, for sharing your research with us. Such a rich content that you have there. Questions for Michelle? And to see if there's anything. Oh, yes, I think in the Q&A, this may be a silly question from Sarah Pete. She says, but how do you deal with the photos of the documents once you have left the archives and are ready to dig into the content further? Do you print them out or you just read them enlarged on your computer screen? What do you do?
Yeah, so I take my pictures with an app on my phone called Genius Scan, which automatically turns it into a PDF. So that's the first thing for me is like make it a PDF, because then I can use it on Adobe to OCR, making it searchable, things like that. Easy, better. I will label all of those documents as well with the archive that they come from. So I have little tiny little footers on all of those documents with the archive and the folder, so that doesn't get lost. And they're all split up into individual documents. That is a lot of work, right? But it makes my life easier down the road, so it's worth it. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is I just go through those PDFs. Usually I will make one big folder of every document. So I do split them up from wherever they came from, and I make one big folder, and then I put it in order of year. So I put it in that timeline. I usually, by my labeling, the way that I label documents, I have it in that timeline already, so I can just organize it that way. And I sort of just go through and read it in order of when they were created. It's not always the best way, and I certainly move around and do it different ways as well, but that's the way I do it. Is the biggest step, though, I'd say, is turning into PDFs, making sure everything is labeled, and making sure that the naming convention is sort of the same for everything.
Great. Okay. What a process. So we have another question from Dino Robinson, who is the director over the Shorefront Legacy Center, which is a BMRC institution and focuses on the North Shore and African American history there. So he's thanking you for your your research and sharing it, and to help you find more women in the movement. One that he is aware of is Alice Tregay, and there's a link in the Q&A there. So he says, our organization Shorefront partnered with her in creating a documentary film on her civil rights work in the Chicago area, and it's titled Alice's Ordinary People. That seeks to, and so it seems to be aligned with what you're looking for in terms of making sure you find more women in the movement.
Yeah, thank you so much for that recommendation.
Yeah, and Dino is also a BMRC board member, so very active with us. Other questions? Wow, people do want to keep in touch with you, so please, when you do get a chance before we wrap up, put your email in the chat, I guess, or we'll share it. Have you started the process of identifying participants here in the Chicago area for your oral interviews? Is a question from Wendy Hill. If so, if we hear of others in our travels, how can we get in contact with you? So again, wanting to follow up and give you feedback, and also to this person, Wendy Hill, she wants to share some info.
Yeah, thank you. So my email is just michelle.johnson@yale.edu. So if you're looking for me, that's it. And I think I just dropped that in the Q&A as well. I partially have started making that list. I also will do it as I go through these documents and really process. I know that also with the documentary with 63 Boycott, they have a pretty extensive sort of building list of participants there. So I am sort of drawing from some of that as well. Like I said, I don't know if I'm actually going to get to oral histories for this dissertation project right now, just because, if you know, a good dissertation is a done dissertation. So I am trying to get it done, but certainly if it turns into a book project, that's something I for sure want to do. And with the time constraints, right? Like, we know that these people unfortunately are older. So I do want to make moves as soon as I can. So it is something I'm interested in. It's just something that isn't necessarily on my radar right now.
Thank you, Michelle. There may be other questions which you can answer typing into the Q&A for us.
Yeah,
so
thank you.
I'm going to turn it back over to Marcia, I think.
Yes, thank you, Allison. We are so thankful for our interns, Cameron, Diane, and Sydney, and also to the host institutions and to the staff of the host institutions who are mentoring. those students, so Northern Illinois University, Cook County Historic Archives and Records Office, and DePaul University. And we are very grateful for Michelle Johnson's time. We don't want to keep too much of your time because you have 1,200 documents that you need to read. So we're definitely going to support you in doing that. What you see on the screen here is just some information about how you can connect with the BMRC and continue to engage with us. Our email address is there if you have thoughts or ideas, questions about the BMRC, about collections, really about anything that you think we could be helpful, please let us know. Our website is also listed there where you can find more information about everything that we've discussed today. Our YouTube information, as well as our social media handles where you can follow us at Chicago BMRC.